going into June. There are going to be so many amazing speakers, so many other inspiring creators there, and I am so very excited. There are still some tickets left, so if you have not yet gotten your pass, I highly suggest you do so. You can get yourself a discount when you use my code Rachel Shannon. Let me know down below if I'll be seeing you there. With that being said, let's get into this disturbing case. Micah Miller was born on March 7, 1994 in Wichita, Kansas to parents Michael Francis and Angela Ramirez. She had 4 sisters, Anna, Sierra, Abby, and Destiny, and 1 brother, Nathaniel. After living in Kansas for some time, the family moved to South Carolina in 2007, where they settled. Micah was described by those who knew her as energetic, adventurous, bold, determined, passionate, and giving. She was known to be a hard worker and a risk taker who was determined to succeed at everything she put her mind to. She also loved a good challenge. She went vegan for a year, which was definitely tough for her, but she made it work and loved the challenge of it. Micah loved outdoor activities like waterfall rappelling, hiking, and running. She even went skydiving for fun, which really just speaks to her sense of adventure and willingness to try new things, no matter how scary they might be. Micah was also known as being extremely close to her family and made sure to stay in contact with those she cared about. She also had a little dog, Loki, who she absolutely adored. Overall, family was such an important thing to Micah. Back in 2009, then 14-year-old Micah met John Paul Miller, who is 14 years older than her. They actually met because Micah was a member of the church youth group at John's church. At first, the two started off as friends, but as they grew closer and closer, their friendship turned into a relationship. Ultimately, the pair married on November 7, 2017, when Micah was about 23 and John was 38. From there, the two were described as being basically inseparable, spending almost every day and night together for the entirety of their relationship. Now, John Paul is a pastor at the Solid Rock Church in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Micah was known as being a great help at the church, doing whatever she could to be an active member of the church. She was the worship leader, the graphics designer, a women's ministry leader, and the pastor's assistant. Everything she did was with the utmost integrity and faithfulness. Not only at the church, but she wanted to be the best wife she could, serving her husband and Jesus with her whole heart. After a church service, Michael would go out of her way to compliment John Paul, calling him the best or funniest preacher in the world. She wanted to make sure he felt confident and loved. According to her obituary, Micah had 5 stepchildren: Logan, Zachary, Eli, Asher, and Selah. She did her best to be the best stepmother she could, serving her husband's children and treating them as if they were her own. Now, it isn't totally clear what the situation with the children was, but I did see in one article that these children are from a previous marriage which ended in 2016. So there is some overlap there between that marriage and when John Paul met Micah. Now, to those on the outside, the relationship between John Paul and Micah appeared to be a solid one. She was the pastor's wife, and that was a role she took seriously. She served her husband, but above all, she served her God. She wanted to be the best wife possible, but behind closed doors, things were not going smoothly for her. Turns out, John Paul was allegedly very abusive, manipulative, and controlling. In the months before her death, she started confiding in her sister about the abuse that she had been suffering at John Paul's hands. Now, in terms of the actual abuse and the specifics of it throughout the entirety of their marriage, we don't have too many specific details about that. Again, this is a very recent and ongoing case, so we may find out more. But whatever he was doing caused Micah to start pulling away and confiding in her family. She was asking them for help, telling them that she was fearful. We also know that his behaviors were concerning to some people who were attending the church, because at least a few of their members, as well as a few of Micah's family members, stopped attending the church because they didn't like how John Paul acted. And when Micah started pulling away, that is when John Paul started to act more and more controlling. The whole timeline starts in February of 2023. On February 12th, 2023, Micah and John Paul filed a postnuptial agreement regarding what would happen if they were to divorce. In the documents, the couple agreed that neither would seek alimony. They also listed that their home was owned by the church, so it doesn't count as marital property. Neither would talk negatively about Solid Rock Ministries, and they would keep their personal lives confidential. Both signed these documents, but by March of 2024, the filing was actually dismissed. Later that year, in October of 2023, Micah actually filed for divorce from her husband, but the filing was dismissed, saying that the couple should be able to resolve the issues between them. Then, sometime in late 2023 or early 2024, Micah then confided in her sister that she noticed people following her and tracking her where she went. She believed that John Paul had hired people to follow her around and keep tracks of her whereabouts. Eventually, the stalking got to the point where Micah feared for her safety, so at that time, she did report the stalking to police. Then, Micah found out that John Paul started moving assets so that Micah wouldn't have anything to her name. For example, the deed to the house was actually changed to one of his sons rather than being the property of the church. By February 8th, 2024, Micah had been admitted to a mental health facility for treatment. One source states that she was involuntarily committed by her husband, though she didn't want to be committed herself. At the time that she was committed, her car was left in a Walmart parking lot. While in the hospital, apparently she told staff that her and her husband were unofficially separated since January the prior month. She also confided that John Paul had been grooming her from the age of 10 when they first met at the church until they were married in 2017. Which, even if they did meet at 14 rather than 10, both are equally disturbing. The fact that this grown man in his late 20s to early 30s was talking to a 14-year-old, that's already very, very disturbing and totally wrong. On the outside, while Micah was hospitalized, John Paul started moving Micah's personal belongings out of their home and moved them into an apartment of a friend. This was not something that Micah would have approved of and was done without her knowledge. It was only when she returned home from the hospital on February 10th that Micah found her belongings had been moved. In addition to her stuff from the home being moved after being released, she went back to the Walmart parking lot to get her car. But when she got there, she saw that it was gone. At the time, she knew that John Paul had stolen her car and wouldn't tell her where he moved it to. At that time, Micah filed a complaint with the police to report the car as stolen. When police followed up with John Paul about the car, he told officers that he and Micah weren't legally separated. He said that she suffers from mental health disorders where she experiences episodes on an annual basis, usually around Christmas. She starts to become reckless and spends large amounts of money when she stops taking her medication. When it comes to the car, it was marital property, so he told police that he did take the car and was unwilling to return it. He said that she was still within her reckless time frame, so he didn't want her to have it. It was for her own good. At the time, it was determined that because the couple is still legally married, the vehicle was marital property, so this did not qualify as a criminal offense. Now, going back to the weeks before she went to the hospital, Micah started gathering evidence that she was going to use to support her claims against John Paul when she planned to file for divorce. She had several different documents, emails, files, pictures, all sorts of information that showed that John Paul was not treating her well. But after she got back from the hospital, she found that all of those files had been removed from her laptop. She also couldn't access her own iCloud account anymore, her email, or her Facebook. Unfortunately, she was never able to recover those documents, and of course, the speculation here is that her husband, John Paul, removed those documents from her devices. It's also suspected that John Paul accessed her accounts like her Facebook and email and was sending emails from her accounts pretending to be her. So up to this point, we can see that Micah was beginning to take the steps towards separating from her husband. She was confiding in family members about John Paul's violent behaviors, and she was getting evidence to show that he was abusive. It's not a coincidence, in my opinion, that she separated from him in January. Then he has her involuntarily committed, and then while she's committed, allegedly, he starts moving his assets and removing Micah's personal property from the home, and then going on her devices and deleting documents. That seemed very intentional. While all of this was going on, Micah continued to confide in her sister. She started talking about her life after divorce, things that she was looking forward to. Back in October of 2023, Micah had traveled to Kenya on a missions trip through the church. When she got back, she told her sister that after the divorce, she wanted to live part-time in Kenya to continue her work. She had even shipped some of her belongings to Kenya to start the process. But at the same time, she told her sister that she was scared to file for divorce. She said that she was afraid her life would be taken from her if she left John Paul, even saying to her sister, quote, "If I end up with a bullet in my head, it was not me, it was John Paul." Then on March 11th, 2024, Micah called the Horry County Police to report that a tire on her car had been damaged while she was at the Spring Maid Pier. In the report, she said that when she got into her car at the pier, she heard a pop sound when she started driving. She looked at the tire to see what happened, and she found that someone put a razor blade in the tire. This was actually the second time that week that she found a razor in her tire. After an officer arrived on scene, he helped her change to a spare tire, and then Micah left and went to a gas station to get gas. Micah said that while she was at the gas station, John Paul pulled up to her and tried speaking with her. She told him to go away, that she didn't want to talk. Then, when she pulled out her phone to start recording the incident, he sped off. She then took her car to the Honda dealership to get the spare tire replaced. At the time, the car mechanic actually informed Micah that they found a GPS tracking device on the car. It's believed that obviously John Paul is responsible for the damage to the tire. This also confirms Micah's worries that she was being followed and tracked, again, probably by John Paul. After discovering this, she immediately went to the local magistrate's office with a police officer to get a restraining order against John Paul. While there, the officer noticed a white Honda Accord slowly driving by the office before speeding up and driving away. Micah told the officer that it was her husband in her car. She then handed the tracking device over to the police for them to continue their investigation. According to Micah's brother, Micah actually forwarded him an email where John Paul was apologizing for the damage done to her tires. He said in the email that he became angry when Micah confided in or put her family before him, and when she did this, it made him want to hurt her. He stated in the email, quote, "When someone hurts me, I try to hurt them back rather than forgive," going on to say, "Instead of me forgiving you, I just attack and try to cause pain." That statement is very self-explanatory. By April of 2024, Micah told her brother about some legal documents that she had prepared so that her brother would be the one making decisions about her well-being. However, when he tried gaining access to those documents, he realized that they were gone. The only documents that he could find were the ones that appointed John Paul as her power of attorney. That same month, a week before her death, as Micah was dealing with these struggles, going through the abuse, and all the mounting stresses of it all, Micah posted a video to social media. She spoke about her abuse and offered support to viewers who are struggling with leaving a dangerous situation because they think God will be mad at them.
So today my heart's a little heavy. I've had a lot of women that have reached out to me about situations of abuse. And I just want to tell you what a lot of people have told me lately and reminded me, because I think I forgot. I knew, but I pushed it in the back of my head just because of my situation. But you are the bride of Christ. Before anybody else's bride, male or female, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what gender you are. Abuse is abuse. And you are the bride of Christ. And my Bible says that he took all the abuse you could think of for you so that you didn't have to live that life of slavery and bondage and pain. Jesus took it all for you. So you don't have to stay in a abusive relationship. Whether that's sexual, whether that's somebody forcing you to take illegal drugs, or alcohol abuse, or physical abuse, psychological abuse, making you think that this is all your fault, or you're a bad mom, or you're a bad wife, or you're a bad husband, or you're not giving it your all when you know you are. God hates divorce, but why? According to everybody I've asked and the scriptures that I've found, it's because it hurts people. But does abuse hurt people? How do you think God feels about that? So, I want to remind you, like a bunch of people have been reminding me lately, that I'm God's bride first. And even an earthly spouse, who's a good spouse, when they know that their bride is being hurt, just imagine what an earthly spouse does. What do you think your heavenly spouse does? When you're the bride of Christ and he sees his bride going through abuse and hurt, what do you think he thinks about that? So, encouragement in all this is, you are the bride of Christ first, before anybody else's. And he's got you. And he sees you. And he loves you.
Finally, after all of this, Micah filed for divorce from John Paul for a second and final time. By April 25th, 2024, John Paul was served those divorce papers. 2 days later, Micah is found dead. Then, just a few days ago, police released a detailed timeline of Micah's final hours. By April 27th, Micah is last seen via Ring doorbell camera leaving her residence at 10:13 a.m. before returning at 11 a.m. She then leaves her home for a second time by 11:38 a.m. By 12:12 p.m., Micah is seen on surveillance camera walking into a Dick's pawn shop, and at 12:13 p.m., she is seen buying a gun and ammunition. She leaves the store by 12:34 p.m. By 1:06 p.m., she is then seen traveling along Highway 501. At 2:54 p.m., Micah called 911 and told the dispatcher that she was at a national park. She asked if her phone could be traced, stating that her location was turned on. She then tells the dispatcher that she is about to kill herself and wants her family to know where to find her. The dispatcher tries gathering more information, but Micah ends the call abruptly.
Robinson County 911, what's the address of your emergency?
Hi, are you able to trace the location of my phone?
You don't know where you're at?
At National Park.
What's the phone number you're calling me from?
843-655-5242.
Where's the park located at?
In Bear Bluff. I have my location on, I think, on my phone. Find my phone is on. Just did my my location.
Okay, I'm showing, I don't think you are in Robinson County. Are you at the Lumber River State Park?
Yeah, that's where I am.
Okay. Tell me what happened.
I'm about to kill myself, and I just want my family to know where to find me.
Okay, ma'am. Just listen to what I'm saying, okay? Let me make sure I got the exact location where you're at, okay? Just 1 minute.
After the call is placed by 3:50 p.m., officers are able to ping her phone location and arrive to Lumber River State Park. Officers scoured the area.
It's not crafty. It's your craft.
Of the state park and found Micah's car near the park. In the passenger seat of the car, investigators located a Sig Sauer gun case as well as a box of ammunition and the receipt for those items. As police searched the wooded area, a witness approached officers carrying a bag with items that belonged to Micah, including her ID. The witness said that they saw a woman who was crying before hearing a gunshot go off while he was fishing. Another witness then called to inform officers that they discovered a body in the water. Officers went to that location, where they then found 30-year-old Micah Miller deceased in the water within that national park. Located next to her was a Sig Sauer 9mm handgun that matched the serial number of the gun she purchased earlier that day. They also found her cell phone in the bag that the witness had. Upon investigating the phone, officers found a Google search for national parks near me. Then they found GPS data searching for Lumber River State Park and the phone traveling in that direction. After finding Micah's body, she was sent off to the medical examiner for an autopsy. The medical examiner determined that she had died from a single gunshot wound to her head and ruled that her cause of death was a suicide. We don't know much more information beyond that. The medical examiner did state, though, that the wound was not to the back of her head, as it had been speculated. The day after Micah's untimely and tragic death, John Paul went back to the church to deliver a sermon, and at the very end of the service, he took a moment to speak on his wife's death. He said that he got a call late last night informing him that his wife had died the night prior. He said that it was a self-inflicted death, going on to say that she had mental health issues and hadn't been taking her medication. He then announced that he was going to be taking a break from the church to grieve and heal in peace.
We're not going to do an altar call today. Instead, I'm going to have you stand up and I'm going to make an announcement. And after the announcement, I'm going to ask that you leave church quietly and don't talk about the announcement here in the building, please, if you can, so y'all can stand to your feet. Before I make the announcement, I also want to say that my request to you is that you will continue to come to church and serve and give for the next little bit. 'Cause I don't want to. I'm taking a little bit of a break, and I don't want to have to worry about the church. My break may be a few days, a few weeks. I don't know. I got a call late last night. My wife has passed away. Yeah, it was self-induced, and it was up in North Carolina. And we're gonna have a funeral for her next Sunday here at 3 p.m. And so it's all I can. Yeah, I'm just kind of going on adrenaline right now. So y'all pray for me and my kids and everybody. And she wasn't. Y'all knew that she wasn't well mentally, and that she needed her medicine that was hard to get to her. And so I'm sure there'll be more details to come. But just keep our family in your prayers. And I'm going to let Pastor Randall, a bishop, he can pray. I get a microphone and pray out. If you have anything you want to share as well, I appreciate it.
In the days and weeks after Micah's death, those who knew the couple, as well as people all over the country and in the media, have been going wild with speculations and calling Micah's death into question. Did she really kill herself, or was her husband responsible? I'd say that literally everyone who took a quick look into this case can see that Micah was being abused and harassed before her death, and she was afraid for her life. She filed for divorce 2 days before she was found dead, which is not a coincidence. She also told her sister that if she found a bullet in her head, it was John Paul, and then she was found with a bullet in her head. To add to that, after her death, news came out that John Paul was actually in a relationship with another woman prior to his divorce from Micah. 44-year-old John Paul was seeing a waitress, Christiana. The two met when she waited on his table, and he left her a 50% tip as well as his phone number. In the course of them talking, by March 4th, flirty messages were found between the two. John Paul is asking for a selfie, Christiana sends one, and he tells her how beautiful she is. But sometime after the two started talking, Christiana got the feeling that John Paul was a married man. She said that there were some red flags that she noticed, and she had also talked to others who knew John Paul from the church, who all spoke of the very negative interactions and disturbing behaviors he showed. After confirming that he was married when he found Micah's Facebook page, she said that she wanted to send Micah a message to warn her that he was talking to another woman, but Christiana could tell that her Facebook was being operated by John Paul, so she decided not to message her. Then, the day after Micah died, when Christiana saw the news, she texted John Paul asking him if anything was new. He replied, "Yes, lots is new, LOL, I'll text you later." Knowing that his wife just died, obviously, Christiana was very disturbed by this response, literally saying, "laugh out loud," when referring to his wife's very recent death. Once again, obviously, these are all very suspicious circumstances that all point directly towards John Paul as possibly being involved in his wife's death. So of course, after Micah's death, police investigated John Paul's whereabouts in the days and hours surrounding. Plate readers from the interstate showed that on the evening of April 26th, John Paul traveled from Myrtle Beach to Charleston for a sporting event. His presence at the sporting event was confirmed by a witness. By April 27th, the day of Micah's death, John Paul's truck was spotted driving along the highway heading from the direction of Charleston back to Myrtle Beach. By 1:35, he is seen at 41 Grocery Store and Grill, which according to Google Maps is about a 41-minute drive away from Lumber River State Park. Then, as we know, by 2:54 p.m., Micah called the police to inform them that she was going to take her own life. In the call, she sounds eerily calm and matter-of-fact, stating that she just wants her family to find her body. So with all of this information, it does clear up a lot of the speculation that has been circulating online. It appears that just before Micah called the authorities to notify them of her death, John Paul was 41 minutes away. Now, I will say that technically, if he drove directly from the 41 Grocery Store to Lumber River State Park, leaving at 1:35 p.m., he would have arrived around 2:15 p.m., which gives 30 minutes before the call was made. So there is still speculation that something could have happened within that short period of time. If he arrived to the state park, found her, and forced her to make that call in that short period of time. However, with what we know, I do think that's a little bit of a stretch. Micah went and bought the gun and is even seen kind of smiling in the surveillance video. She researched the national parks in her area. She drove herself to the Lumber State Park. There's no information on either Micah or John Paul's phone to show that he knew where Micah would be or that he planned on visiting that area. There's no information to show that he was even in that area at all, regardless of how close he was within that 30 minutes before the call was made. So even though this definitely isn't what anyone wants to believe, all of the evidence so far points towards Micah taking her own life. It's tragic and heartbreaking and very unexpected, but that's what the information indicates. Now, if there is more information that comes out that says this might not be the case, then I wouldn't necessarily be surprised, but as of right now, Micah taking her own life is the most likely scenario here. Now, with that being said, do I still think that John Paul, in a way, bears responsibility? Absolutely. He allegedly abused her. He clearly was planning on making her life as difficult as possible after the divorce. She feared him, and he was not going to let her prove to anybody that he was abusive. He was stalking her. He was controlling her. So regardless of what happened, it is not a coincidence that she died 2 days after filing for divorce. While I'm not going to sit here and speculate on why Micah might have chosen to do this, I will say that I believe all of these factors played into that decision. We might find out information about those 2 days that gives us more about what happened that may have caused this to happen, but even if we don't,
Sir.
I say, we're not at Dover yet, are we?
No, sir, but there's a message for you, sir, in the wireless room.
I'll be right there.
is considered one of the most influential and acclaimed vocalists in country music history. Tragically, her life would be cut short.
That feeling you get when you're on budget and on cloud nine. Let financial become...
Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of 10 to Life with me, Annie Elise. I'm still having some jaw issues, guys. Be kind. But we're still going to talk about this case today because it is one that is heartbreaking, frustrating, and kind of gives you all of the feels. So if you're brand new and you have never checked out this channel before, welcome. I am so happy to have you here today. And for all of my returning 10 to Lifers, thank you as always for watching, supporting, and doing all the things. Being a partner like this is one of the most dangerous things you can do. We know that, right? So we have to just trust that people know their own situation better than anybody on the outer. In this situation, and her boyfriend end up dead in very highly suspicious circumstances. It sounds pretty obvious what happened, right? He must have killed her. Well, I will say, that's what the police thought when Holly Williams and Bill Lanway were found dead in 2020. They saw this long history of domestic disturbances. She had filed a restraining order against him just days before her death. The writing was on the wall. So the detectives figured, oh, okay, he must have killed her and then himself. But then there were a few bits of evidence that just didn't fit that narrative. And when the investigators began to scratch beneath the surface, they uncovered one of the most wild, twisted plots I've ever seen. It almost defies logic, defies belief, all of the things. And if you think that you know where this story is going, think again, because you cannot predict how this one ends. It is... and grew up in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. It's a city just over 35 miles from the heart of downtown Nashville. Now, Nashville is famous for being the home of country music, and with very good reason. There's an enormous music scene in Nashville, but it's also full of art, museums, food, and it was a really trendy place to grow up near, with a lot to offer. But in spite of all of that, Holly, unfortunately, had a really difficult childhood. Her parents divorced while she was still young, and she had a very tense relationship with her mom. It was bad enough that Holly moved in with her father and her stepmom for a little while as well. Now, through all of these changes, Holly kept dreaming of her big, exciting future. She eventually moved to downtown Nashville, and she became an esthetician, which is what you call a skincare professional, somebody who does facials, all of the skincare things. But even though Holly accomplished a lot after moving, the decision to be away from her family was a pretty difficult one, and her relationship with her mom was not getting any better. Eventually, she cut off all contact with her. Now, Holly did try to keep having a healthy relationship with her 5 siblings. She was always making sure that they felt included, loved, cared for, and she was especially close with her sister Emily. They spent every single holiday together. They would carve pumpkins together on Halloween. They'd wear matching pajamas on Christmas, and that was kind of just the person that Holly was. She really cared about people, almost to a fault. She always wanted to believe the best in all of the people that she met, and she wanted to believe that everybody had good intentions. But obviously, and unfortunately, that isn't always the case. We know that. Now, I don't know the full specifics, but according to Holly's friends, people were always taking advantage of her. And a few times, she even ended up in some really scary situations and very toxic relationships. For example, in 2018, Holly met this guy. He was a car mechanic, and his name was Bill Lanway. They were at a music festival. They clicked right away. They were both familiar with the nightlife, the party scene in Nashville. They also both loved to go to bars, to dance, and just have fun. And Bill was a lot like Holly. People thought that he was just irresistible because he was so energetic, so outgoing, and the life of the party. He was one of those people, and when he showed up, everybody knew that they were going to have a good time because it was honestly impossible not to have fun when Bill was around. Now, that wasn't all that he had in common with Holly, though. He also had a difficult childhood, just as she had. However, his was way worse. Bill was born on March 17th, 1983, in a town called Clarksville, which is in northern Tennessee. When he was 3.5, Bill's mother and father went out for the night, and Bill and his sister stayed home with a babysitter. Now, that's all pretty normal, but when Bill's parents got home, they began arguing. Things escalated really fast, and Bill's father, Lyle, ended up holding everybody hostage for hours. Now, the good news is nobody got hurt. Eventually, Bill's dad let everybody go, and he was arrested and then taken to a psychiatric facility for treatment. But he didn't stay there long, though. Just 1 week later, on Thanksgiving to be exact, they released Lyle so that he could visit his family for the holiday. And sadly, as soon as he got to the apartment, he grabbed a knife and he stabbed his wife, killing her. Now, Bill and his sister, they witnessed the whole thing. They ran to their neighbor's apartment for help, which was a good call because Lyle was not done. He was on a rampage. He stabbed a different neighbor, not the one who was helping the kids, but then he stabbed himself before running from the police entirely. He was eventually caught, and this time the authorities didn't send him to a hospital. They sentenced Lyle to life in prison, which was where he stayed until he got out on parole more than 30 years later, in 2017. So even though Bill's father was still alive, he wasn't in the picture for most of Bill's life. Bill was basically an orphan. His aunt and uncle raised him and his sister, but he did not have parents. Now, you would think that with that kind of violent, terrifying history, Bill would be super withdrawn, that he would be scared of the world. but he kind of grew up to be the opposite kind of person.
What happens when you drink Rise mushroom coffee? Your body feels lighter and freer. These turkey tails help cut down on bloat and balance your gut with prebiotics for smoother digestion. Coffee without a stomachache?
Everybody knew him as a fun, outgoing guy, and he was even voted the best personality in high school. And like I said earlier, Bill, he loved to party. But we need to talk about some of the other dark stuff that went down before he met Holly, because it ended up having a really big impact on their relationship. In his early 20s, Bill was having a party at his house one night when he met a woman named Dana Jones. Dana was 4 years younger than Bill, and also still in high school. In spite of the age difference, they got along great though, and over time, they started having a very casual, like friends with benefits type sort of relationship. Which I have to say, it's kind of a huge red flag to me because I don't know their exact ages at the time, but I do know that Bill was a young adult, and Dana couldn't even legally vote yet. But although he was older, he was just a little too old to be covered by those Romeo and Juliet laws. They apply in Tennessee if the age gap is less than 4 years. And we also know that they were sexually active, because just 6 months after they started hooking up, Dana learned that she was pregnant. Even though their relationship hadn't been very serious up until then, they were really excited to have a baby together, and they both committed to starting a family. Dana gave birth to a baby girl named Madison, and she was basically a daddy's girl through and through, just super close to Bill. They absolutely adored each other. But then, in May of 2010, when Madison was only 4 years old, she became super sick. For 3 weeks straight, she had flu-like symptoms that never improved. So Bill and Dana took her to the emergency room, of course, and that's where the doctors diagnosed her with a very rare and aggressive form of brain cancer. It had already spread to her lungs and her pancreas by this point as well. Now, thanks to the miracle of modern medicine and a very, very intense treatment plan, Madison went into remission after a year. And I have to imagine Bill and Dana were thrilled that their daughter was recovering. But their happiness, it only lasted a short while, and a few months later, the cancer came back, and this time it was worse than before. That fall, on September 21st, 2011, Madison ended up passing away after her long battle with cancer. And honestly, as a parent, I can't even imagine how Bill and Dana dealt with that. Because for me, the thought of my children getting hurt or sick, let alone dying, I mean, it honestly eats my insides up. I don't understand how anyone can ever move past something like that. It is just absolutely heartbreaking, and especially to have hope that she was in remission and covering, it's just brutal. So it's not surprising to me at all that Bill and Dana were devastated by this. In particular, Bill's entire personality changed. He wasn't outgoing anymore, and it was like he just withdrew into himself. It was like he didn't want to even be a part of the world anymore, if that makes sense. On top of that, he started acting angry and very irrational. When his temper flared up, which was a lot of the time, he would lash out at Dana. He even damaged some of her property, according to an interview that she gave to 2020. Now, this outburst, it was the last straw for Dana. Their relationship was already super strained, which is pretty common when it comes to the death of a child. It's tough for the parents to stay committed to one another when they're both just drowning in grief. But now, with Bill's new unhealthy and violent behavior, she was done. So after Maddie's funeral, Dana gave Bill a box of Maddie's things and told him to leave and never contact her again. He took her request to heart, and he disappeared from her life entirely after that. Now Dana, she wasn't the only person who Bill withdrew from. After Maddie died, it was basically like he didn't want to have anything to do with anybody anymore. He wouldn't talk to people, he wouldn't make plans, he just shut down. And there was only one way to get him out of his shell, by taking him to a party. And I know it sounds like a contradiction, but Bill's friends realized that if they got him into a crowd of people and put a drink in his hands, it was almost like he would just go right back to being his old self. If he was at a bar or a club, he'd be talkative, he'd be laughing, he'd be having fun. Now, I'm no mental health professional, I'm not going to even try to pretend to be, but I will say that it's not a good idea to run away from your problems, even if, in the eyes of Bill's friends, it might have felt like they were doing the right thing at the time. So while Bill was out at all those bars, clubs, and festivals, that's when he met Holly. He still had never really dealt with all of the trauma he had experienced, though, and he was still suffering from emotional issues pretty severely. But that didn't stop him from starting to see her romantically anyway. And like I said before, Holly, she had her fair share of problems as well. She was really quick to trust people, even when there was no indication that that person was actually trustworthy. So when Bill and Holly started dating, it was really only a matter of time before their relationship became pretty chaotic. Beginning in 2018, they were stuck in this kind of on and off again pattern where they would date, then they would have this super dramatic breakup, then they would get back together again and wash, rinse, repeat. You know how it goes. Pretty much everybody who knew Bill and Holly thought that their relationship was extremely toxic. And a couple of times, Holly even texted her friends and basically said that she was scared of him. Not in so many words, but she implied that she thought that he might hurt her. And as time went on, their relationship got even worse. According to Holly, in December of 2019, Bill broke her car's windshield and he punched her in the mouth. Somebody called the police and Bill was arrested, but Holly said that she did not want to press charges. She said she would handle it herself. It would be easy to judge her or blame her for not doing anything, but Holly, she knew her situation. She knew Bill really well, and she could make an educated guess about how he might react if she did take legal action. I would love to personally live in a world where it was always safe and smart for people to call the police when they're stuck dating somebody who is dangerous, but sometimes getting the police involved can make somebody's partner escalate to even more threatening behavior, so I'm sure that Holly had her reasons. A few months later, in March of 2020, Bill lashed out at her again though. This time they were at Holly's apartment when they started arguing, and then Bill held his hand over her mouth so she couldn't breathe. Luckily, Holly managed to get away, and Bill eventually left her apartment. At some point during this fight though, Holly's little dog Max also went missing, which is a very important detail that I'll come back to later. But for now, we just need to know that after the argument, Holly went to the police, and she said that she was now ready to take legal action against Bill. Eventually, they charged Bill with aggravated assault and false imprisonment, but he got out on bond. Now, Holly must have been worried that he would do something again, because that's when she decided to take out a protective order against Bill. Then, a few days after that, Holly found her dog Max, but he was dead on the side of the road. Sure, it could have been a coincidence. It was possible that Max got out during the fight, especially if he was scared and picking up on the tension, and then maybe he had run into the road, he had been hit by a car. But the timing of it all, I don't know, it was a little bit more than suspicious. All of it had gone down in the space of just a couple of weeks. Bill and Holly fought, she pressed charges, she got a restraining order, and now her dog died? Holly believed that Bill had killed Max as a way to punish her for taking out that protective order, or to at least send her a message of some kind. The problem was she just couldn't prove it. Either way, Holly was now really frightened of Bill because it seemed like he was showing her what he was capable of. And to all appearances, Holly was completely in the right to be afraid, because just a few days after her dog Max's death, she and Bill both turned up dead too. It was March 13th, 2020 when a construction worker called 911. They said that they found a car that had run off the road and it hit a tree. It was all smashed up, and the worker could see two people inside, a man and a woman, and they appeared to be dead. It was Bill and Holly. Bill's body was on the floor of the front passenger seat and Holly was in the back. Initially, it looked like maybe they had gotten into an accident, but then the police got a closer look, and they saw that Bill and Holly had both been shot multiple times. Bill had 2 head wounds, including one close to his temple on the right side, and Holly had been shot in the head and the chest. An autopsy report showed that the chest wound did not kill Holly right away. She survived for a while before she was then shot in the head. However, Bill's wounds, they were fatal almost immediately. Then, when the police looked at Holly and Bill's records and saw this long history of domestic disputes, including the restraining order that Holly had filed just 9 days before, it was all pretty suspicious. So the detectives came up with a theory.
Get the people you care about the great gifts they deserve today. Then pay over time at Aaron's. Rent to own the furniture, appliances, or the tech they'll love with low, budget-friendly payments. In-store and at Aaron's.com.
Maybe when Bill realized that Holly was ready to leave him for good, he convinced her to get in the car with him. Then he shot her, then shot himself. While Bill was dead and Holly was dying in the back seat, the car ran off the road and hit the tree. It seemed like a plausible theory, and once Holly's friends and family members heard about what had happened, they thought the police's theory sounded probable. Bill really did seem like the kind of person who would kill Holly and take his own life after. Even Bill's friends and family, the people who you would expect to defend him and have his back, they sort of just accepted that it was something that he would do. They all knew about his recent issues and how he had treated Holly. So a simple open and shut case pretty much, right? Bill and Holly died in a murder-suicide. It's settled, it's solved. Except there were a couple pieces of evidence that didn't fit that narrative. And the detectives, they spent some time trying to make it all fit together before they had to admit that maybe Bill didn't do this. First, Bill's body was on the passenger side of the car, and Holly was in the back. Neither one of them was in the driver's seat. I suppose you could argue that the car hit the tree, and with enough force, it sent Bill flying from one side of the car to the other. But it seems a lot easier to believe that maybe somebody else had been driving. Second, Bill and Holly's cell phones weren't in the car with them. And this was 2020, guys. Everybody carried their phones with them everywhere they went. Now, one thought was that maybe Bill left his phone at home on purpose, especially if he knew that he was going to kill Holly and take his own life before the drive was over. He would want to make it as difficult as possible for anybody to track him, to stop him. But nobody could figure out why Holly would leave her phone at home too. She wouldn't leave it behind on purpose, especially if she was even the tiniest bit suspicious that Bill might try something. So on their own, the missing cell phones might have just been one of those things where you say, that doesn't make that much sense, but I guess we'll never know. But there was something else that the police could not find anywhere in the car, and the absence of this item really made the detectives throw out the entire Bill did it theory. See, there was no murder weapon, not anywhere near the scene. So imagine that Bill shot Holly, then took his own life. Then after they were both dead or injured, the car ran off the road on its own into the tree. The gun would still be in the car, right? Even if Bill's gunshot wounds weren't fatal right away and he was conscious long enough to toss the gun out the window, it still would have landed close to the road. But the police searched everywhere, and there was no gun.
But when the vehicle is pulled up from the embankment, police discover clear signs of foul play.
From the outside of the car crash, but when you looked inside, it wasn't a car crash.
The passenger windows were broken out, but there was no glass around the vehicle anywhere to be seen. Typically on a traffic crash, you'd see glass on the inside and on the outside.
Still, since it looked so much like a murder and purposefully taking your own life, after that, the police came up with another theory. Maybe somebody staged the scene specifically to mislead them. It could have been a professional hit, maybe done by somebody who knew exactly what they were doing. The problem was, once the police ruled Bill out, there weren't any other obvious suspects. Nobody seemed to think that Bill or Holly had any enemies either. But Holly did have a bunch of security cameras in her home, so the investigators pulled that footage just to see if anybody had been dropping by, maybe acting suspicious, that sort of thing. And they found some very interesting clips that were super recent, right after that latest domestic dispute, to be exact. Specifically, the one where Max, the dog, went missing. So after Bill left, Holly took a bunch of steps to try and protect herself, and the cameras filmed everything. She went to her apartment management and had them install a new deadbolt on her door, and in the footage, she talked about how she was doing it because she was scared of Bill. Not long after she got the new locks, Bill actually came back and tried to break in, and again, this was all on film. He got past an electronic lock on the front door, he got inside, and then he wandered around for a little while. It seemed like he was looking for Holly, but luckily for her, she was out at the time. Now on its own, this only made Bill look way more guilty. But after his break-in, a few other guys dropped by. The police found clip after clip of one man after another knocking on her door and asking for her by name. Now this was especially weird because the men were trying to hide their faces from the cameras, so clearly they weren't ordinary delivery men or anything like that really. Then on March 10th, 3 men all showed up together. They were all wearing black and they all had their faces covered. They knocked on the door and they were yelling Holly's name, and they also just kept saying that they just wanted to talk. Now, Holly was home, but clearly she didn't believe them, and she wasn't willing to talk. And the cameras actually showed her running around until she found this thing called a safety bar to keep her door from being opened. So basically, she blocked the guys from breaking it down and forcing their way inside. So clearly, those 3 men, they were worth investigating, right? Especially now that Holly and Bill were dead. But the problem was, the detectives couldn't tell who they were, especially with their faces covered. One of the men had part of his face exposed, but it wasn't enough to make an identification. The police released some of these pictures to the public, though, thinking that maybe somebody would recognize them anyway. But that didn't work. Nobody called in with any helpful information. So that meant that the next step was to dig into Holly's personal life, to see if maybe she might have known these guys through her job, or maybe her social circle, surely something. And they only talked to a couple of people before they learned that Holly wasn't only working as an esthetician in Nashville. She was also doing escort work on the side. She'd been doing it since she was 18 or 19 years old, and from the sounds of it, she was pretty open about what she did. It was no big secret. Lots of her friends knew, and they told the police all about it. Holly used the name Layla Love, and she was mostly based in Nashville, but sometimes she would travel to other cities. Now, it was worth it because her clients, they paid her very well, not just in cash. The men also gave her very expensive gifts like jewelry, vacations, and even furniture for her apartment. As it turned out, Holly had a very, very expensive taste, and she couldn't afford all the things that she wanted with just the money that she made as an esthetician. So she used escort work to take her finances to a whole other level. Now, of course, as we know, sex work, it can be dangerous, so the police began looking into all of her clients, and they found a couple of potential leads. First of all, when those men knocked on her door and told Holly that they wanted to talk to her, one of them mentioned a specific client by name, and another contact sent her a whole bunch of messages right before her death. He was saved in Holly's phone as Jimmy Green, but it wasn't clear if that was his real name or not. Now, what was interesting, though, was that Jimmy messaged Holly on both of her phones, her personal one and a separate one that she used for her escort work. So it seemed like he knew her well enough to get her personal phone number somewhere along the way. The detectives then looked at the phone number that this Jimmy Green guy was using, and it wasn't real. It was tied to this messaging app called Pinger. Now, that's one of those apps which creates a fake number for you, so you can call or text people without them seeing your real number. The only restriction is you need to be connected to the internet to use it. And it's safe to say that Jimmy was using Pinger so that nobody would be able to connect him to Holly. But he may not have thought that plan through entirely, because the police got a subpoena and they got all of Jimmy's user records from Pinger. Unfortunately though, that still didn't tell the police who Jimmy Green really was. But they did get his email address. It was jimmygreen34@gmail.com. Now the good news was Gmail users do have to enter their name when they create an account. The bad news was it doesn't have to be their real name, their legal name, or anything like that. So Jimmy Green put down Agent 47, which was the name of the main character from a video game called Hitman. So to recap, it's a lot guys, the phone number took the police to a Pinger account. That Pinger account led them to a Gmail address, and that email address belonged to someone who apparently liked video games. But the detectives were not any closer to figuring out who this guy actually was. It seemed like Jimmy Green, or whatever his real name was really good at covering his tracks, especially between all the fake names, the Pinger account, all of these things. It made it hard to pin him down, figure out who he was. But it also helped make him look even more suspicious. I get not wanting anyone to know you're hiring an escort, but his methods of covering his trail were on another level. So at this point, the police decided to try something else. Instead of trying to figure out if Jimmy Green had registered with his real name anywhere on the internet,
attention patients exposed to urologist Darius Paduch. Paduch has been criminally convicted for exploiting male patients under the guise of medical care. If you thought your varicocele procedure, ED, or Klinefelter...
They did some digging to learn which IP address was associated with his cell phone number. Then they went to some cell phone companies to see if any of them could match the IP address to one of their customers. So basically, instead of looking at what information Jimmy had entered into his online accounts, they were now trying to track down the specific hardware that he was using. And finally, after all that digging and all of those dead ends, they found the phone that was associated with the IP address. And that phone belonged to a man named Adam Carey. Even better, Adam looked an awful lot like one of those men who had been recorded by Holly's security camera. Specifically, the guy who had part of his face visible. So it was exactly the break in the case that the police needed. Now it was just a matter of figuring out why Adam might have wanted to hurt Holly. Adam had served in the Marines with a special ops team, and after he was discharged, he got a job in private security. But he didn't have a super smooth transition back to civilian life. In 2016, Adam got pulled over because he was impersonating a police officer. The real police searched his car and they found a whole bunch of bombs and other weapons, which to me sounds pretty alarming. I don't know what he was planning to do with all of that, but he only got sentenced to 4 months in prison. And needless to say, Adam sounded like the sort of guy who was more than capable of murdering Bill and Holly. But there was still the question of why. He didn't seem to have any connection to her. He didn't even live in the Nashville area. He was living in North Carolina at the time of the murders. I mean, yes, the police knew that he was texting her on the phone number that she used as an escort, but there was no record that he actually had ever hired her. He also didn't appear on any of her client lists, either his real name or Jimmy Green, and there was nothing that suggested that he might have met her in any other way. So the police then took another look at Adam's Pinger account, the one that he had used so he could text Holly without giving her his real number. And it turned out he had used that account to message somebody else as well. That other person was a guy named Brian Brockway. And apparently he had reached out to Adam because he wanted to hire him for a specific kind of job. It wasn't clear what the gig was though at first, but Brian had a lot in common with Adam. See, he was also a Marine who got a job in private security after he was discharged. He worked a lot with high-level government employees, but he was based in Austin, so again, not a Nashville resident and no immediate connection to Holly. After Brian told Adam about this mystery job, Adam sent him a file. It went through on March 9th, 2020, and it was called Tennessee SITREP. Now, it's not super important to the story, but SITREP is a military term short for Situational Report. Basically, it's just a bunch of information that a military leader might need to know before an operation. In this case, the SITREP was all about Bill and Holly, though, like their schedules, when they usually came, when they went from their house, all sorts of specific details. And Adam also shared the document with one other man named Gilad Peled, who went by Gil for short. Now, just like Adam and Brian, Gil had military experience. He was Israeli and had served with the IDF. According to Gil, he worked in special forces, but that's not quite confirmed. He was also a big guy. I mean, he worked out a lot. So after his discharge, Gil created a private security company in Southern California where he worked for high-profile clients like Charlie Sheen, the actor. Now, I'm not sure why, but he eventually lost that job and moved to Texas afterward. Gil was hoping to start fresh with a brand new security company, which he then called Speartip. But for whatever reason, he just could not find clients or work the way he had in California. It could be that he wasn't as in demand for private security because he was in Austin and not Hollywood, and Hollywood is the land of celebrities, and Austin not so much. But either way, Gil was seriously short on cash and was pretty much ready to accept just about any gig. So because of that, he jumped at an opportunity when a car dealership hired him. It was a place called Charles Maude Toyota, and they had been dealing with trespassing issues. The dealership had been around for decades, so it's no surprise that the founder of Charles Maude Toyota was Charles Maude, and his grandson Eric. The two of them owned it. So I know I just ran through a whole bunch of different names, guys, and it can be really tricky to keep track of, so here's the too long didn't read version of all of that. Holly was texting with Adam Carey. Nobody knew how they knew each other. There was no connection between them. But Adam was working with a guy named Brian Brockway, who had hired him for a mystery job. The police didn't know what that job was, but it involved keeping tabs on Holly and Bill. Maybe Brian hired Adam to hurt them, except Brian also didn't have any obvious connections to Holly and Bill, and Brian and Adam were also working with Gil, and Gil worked for Eric Maud, the owner of this dealership. And then finally, after all of this digging, the police were able to connect Gil to Holly, and they were able to do this through Eric. It's a long, long chain of people, but it all did link together. Now, as for how Eric, the car dealer, knew Holly, he had hired her as an escort several times. Like a lot of Holly's clients, he used a fake name though, and in his case, it was Eric Moore. So about a month before Holly's murder, on February 3rd, 2020, he sent her an email saying that he was going to be in Nashville for a few days coming up. Then, a couple days later, on February 5th, Eric sent Holly a text which read, "Good morning, beautiful. Look forward to today. I'm in Nashville. I'll meet you in the bar like last time. Text me when you arrive." And Eric didn't reach out to Holly again after that. But he did text with Bill, her boyfriend. Now, it's unclear in all of this if Bill was involved in Holly's escort work or what he knew and when, but a month after Eric's trip to Nashville, on March 1st, 2020, Bill hacked into Holly's escort account and found a bunch of information about Holly's clients, and then he sent Eric a bunch of emails basically blackmailing him. See, Eric was married, and he was also super respected in his community, so he had a lot to lose, and Bill could totally trash his reputation if he let everybody know that Eric was seeing an escort. Bill said Eric needed to pay up, or his secret was gonna come out. But rather than pay Bill, Eric reached out to his private security guard, Gil, that very same day. At first, Eric just wanted Gil to figure out who Holly really was, because he knew that her real name couldn't be Layla Love. But apparently, this wasn't Gil's specialty. See, after Eric gave him the orders, Gil reached out to some other people he knew to see if somebody could investigate Layla Love, aka Holly. He wasn't doing it himself. First, Gil asked Brian Brockway for help. Then Brian brought in his brother Chad, who also worked in security. From the sound of it, Chad had no idea what was going on, though. Gil made up a sob story about how a girl had gone missing and was now working as an escort, so Chad thought that maybe he was helping some poor girl reunite with her worried family, and he ended up digging up all of her information, and then he sent it to Brian. Once Brian had all of Chad's findings, he brought in Adam Carey, who then texted Holly from that pinger app. And he didn't just text her. After he joined the job, Adam decided to go straight to the source and confront Holly directly, and he brought some of his friends with him for that. Those two other guys who showed up on that security camera footage. So eventually, Adam realized that Holly wasn't extorting money from Eric, but her boyfriend Bill, he was. It's not clear to me how he figured it out, but basically Adam untangled the whole complicated web. So the next step for Adam was to do something about it, and this meant sending both Bill and Holly messages on the pinger app, and then he followed Bill to the grocery store. I'm not sure Bill knew that he was being followed, though. I do know that on March 11th, Bill called Eric, that car dealer, at home, presumably to keep pressuring him for that payoff. Then, after that phone call, Eric realized, I've had enough. And not long after that, Brian told Gil that he and Adam were authorized to kill both Bill and Holly if it came down to it. Right afterward, Adam sent his two companions home, presumably so there would be as few witnesses as possible, and then the very next day, Brian flew out to Nashville. So the day after that, which was now March 12th, Holly and Bill were killed. It's still unclear exactly how and where everything went down, though, but thanks to those security cameras at Holly's apartment, we know that she and Bill left her place at around 11:40 p.m. Apparently, even with the restraining order and all of their recent fights, he was still with her that night. So they walked out the door, headed toward the parking garage, and then, a second or two later, Bill went back like he had forgotten something inside, he grabbed whatever it was, and then he and Holly left again for real. They walked off, and because of how the cameras were pointed, we don't know where they went. But they were still headed toward the parking area. Then, after they left the frame, the cameras recorded the sound of a car starting. Then, multiple gunshots, and a man and a woman yelling. After that, the sound faded to silence. Now, nobody in the apartment complex heard any of this. It was just from the security camera. But still, the footage was enough for the police to come up with a theory. A new theory. Adam and Brian attacked the couple right after they left the apartment. Right there in the parking lot. They shot Bill on purpose because he was the one behind all of the blackmailing, and then they accidentally hit Holly in the chest. Once they realized that they had—
When a child is sick, there's one thing they need. A really big cookie.
Welcome to our big city.
We're not big on poking sticks and
two bodies to take care of. They drove Holly's car to the dump site. When they got there, they realized that Holly wasn't dead, so they shot her again in the head this time. Then Adam and Brian got out of the car but left it in drive so that it could roll into the woods. Based on some separate gas station security camera footage, we know that after the murders, Adam and Brian drove to Memphis, Tennessee. Adam dropped Brian off at the Memphis airport, and then from there he flew home to Austin, and Adam drove back to North Carolina. Now, weirdly, after all of this went down, Eric left an online review for Gil's company, Speartip. It was like having somebody murdered was right up there with getting, I don't know, a new pair of socks on Amazon or something, and that you want to leave a 5-star review. Now, obviously, the review, it didn't say exactly what Gil did, but it did say, Speartip is very professional and on top of it. They got the job done in an expedited time. Couldn't imagine using anyone else. Now again, I kind of just can't get past this online review, guys. I guess if anybody asked, Eric could have said that Gil had handled the trespassing issue at his car dealership, but it's absurd to me that Adam and the others went to such extreme lengths to cover their tracks just for Eric to basically broadcast to all of the world that he had hired them. And and he had hired them for a hit. Some criminals are just dumb, dumb, dumb. Now, because it was pretty easy for the FBI to pull all of Eric's financial records, they were able to see that he had paid all 3 killers almost $1 million combined. Now, I'm sure if you can tell from everything I've covered already, this was an extremely complex investigation. There were a ton of dead ends and false starts, and what the detectives did eventually find was incredibly complicated. That might be why it took the police 2 whole years to slowly piece everything together. But they were still missing one thing. Proof that Eric ordered the hit, because otherwise it would have been easy for him to just say he hired Gil and the others to, learn Holly and Bill's identity, something like that. Then he could claim that the killers went rogue and he had nothing to do with the murders, right? In fact, some of their text messages did make it sound like the plan was just to kidnap Bill and Holly, just to scare them. So if the detectives wanted to nail everyone, including Eric, they needed somebody to confess that the murder was premeditated, and that it was authorized by him. Now, the police didn't want to tip anybody off that they were a suspect, and especially given that so many of these guys had military backgrounds, it would have been super easy for one or more of them to flee the country and escape justice altogether. This meant that the detectives weren't super eager to pull anybody in for an interrogation. They needed to find a way to get the information without actually questioning Adam, Brian, Gil, or Eric. So they decided to contact Brian's brother, Chad Brockway. Now remember, back when Chad got involved in this scheme, he thought that Holly was a missing woman, and that he was helping in all of this. He had no idea that anybody planned to hurt or kill her. So when the police approached him and he learned the truth about everything that went down, he agreed. He said he would cooperate with the investigation, and even that he would go undercover to get more information. The idea was that Chad was going to call Adam and ask him to commit another murder for hire. When he reached out, Adam was surprisingly chill about the whole conversation too. He talked to Chad all through the process, going into detail about what kind of tools he would need, and then he told Chad his rate. It was going to be $60,000. For a cool 60 grand, he will commit murder. All of which confirmed for the police that Adam was not only willing to kill people for money, but he was also very, very familiar with the process. So then Chad asked his brother Brian to meet him at a restaurant in downtown Austin. And there he wore a wire. But Brian wasn't very talkative. I mean, at least not at first. After they were done eating, Chad and Brian walked out to the parking lot together, and then finally Brian started to open up right before they got into the car. So Chad knew that this was his opportunity. So he asked him all about Eric, Holly, and Bill, and Brian went into detail. Among other things, he said that when he killed them, Bill tried to fight back. It actually sounded a lot like Brian was bragging, like he was proud of himself that he overpowered and murdered another guy. He also said that Adam was the one who killed Holly, and that he thought that it was kind of impressive in a way, because according to Brian, most men don't have the courage to shoot a woman. Which, I just have to say, how absolutely vile is that? To act like killing an innocent person who never did anything to you is some sort of, badge of honor? What a garbage fire of a human being to say these things. I mean, causing harm to another person does not take courage, and it definitely doesn't make you more of a man. So luckily, Brian, Adam, and Gil were all arrested on December 10th, 2021. The police did their best to coordinate the arrests so that they all happened simultaneously, more or less, for the same reason that they hadn't done any of those interrogations beforehand. They were worried that if any of these men learned that they were wanted or they were about to be arrested or tipped off, that they would skip town. But they still waited to go after Eric. From the sound of it, they still couldn't prove that Eric actually hired anybody to kill Bill and Holly, as opposed to, Adam, Brian, and Gil making the call to escalate to murder on their own. That said, the investigators were also pretty sure that none of the killers for hire were willing to take the fall for Eric either. So now, with all 3 of them in custody, they sat down with Gil, and they said that he could help himself if he helped them. They told him to call Eric and say that Adam wanted more money, that for $25,000 more, they would keep quiet about the hit. And Gil went along with the plan. He called Eric and he told him that they needed more cash. And Eric said, quote, "I'll pay the guy $25,000, but I think he needs to go away after that. He did a solid for me, and I appreciate him for that, but I just want to make sure it's, that in 6 months down the road, he isn't going to pop back up. Honestly, I'd rather just take care of him permanently, and then I'll just run $150,000 through Speartip like last time." So this was exactly what the police needed. They immediately sent officers to arrest Eric, who was on the road after a hunting trip at the time. The police pulled him over during the drive back, and with that, they had their last killer in custody. In December of 2022, Gil pled guilty to murder for hire resulting in a death, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and kidnapping resulting in a death. As of this recording, he still hasn't been sentenced though, and in part because his deal required him to testify against the other three. The prosecutors wanted to make sure that he held up his side of the bargain before they decided what his punishment would be. It took almost another whole year before Eric, Adam, and Brian faced the jury in November of 2023. They were all tried together, but they each had their own lawyer, so the courtroom, it was actually pretty chaotic. Their defense teams tried to argue that Gil had actually tricked Eric into hiring the other two. And then, to hear them tell it, Bill killed himself and Holly, just like the police originally suspected. So basically, the argument was that Gil, Adam, and Brian just had the terrible luck to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was a complete coincidence that Holly and Bill died right when these paid private security contractors were tailing them. Okay, right. Now obviously that didn't sound likely at all. Plus, Gil didn't go along with their cover story. He was very detailed during his testimony, saying that at first, the plan was just to kidnap Bill and Holly, try to scare them. But when Brian came up with the idea to kill the couple and made the offer to Eric agreed right away. So after about 2 weeks and 7 hours of deliberation, the jury decided they agreed with Gil's version of events. They found Adam and Brian guilty of conspiracy to commit murder for hire, guilty of kidnapping resulting in death, and guilty of conspiracy to commit kidnapping. Eric was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder for hire and conspiracy to commit kidnapping. All of them, including Gil, could be sentenced to life in prison, and we'll find out more when they have their hearings later in sometime 2024. But for now, Holly and Bill have to wait for justice. So do their friends and family members. And I have to say, they must be enraged that Bill and Holly died for such a stupid reason. Eric cheated on his wife, then panicked when he thought that...
Welcome to NYAC Center, your one-stop destination for all your HVAC needs. We bring 25...
he would get caught. It's all just such a pointless reason to take somebody's life, and it really speaks to how self-absorbed this guy was. He thought that his reputation was worth more than Holly's life, even after it turned out that she had nothing to do with the blackmailing. I also feel especially bad for Holly in all of this, who I have to imagine never had any idea that Bill had hacked into her account to blackmail her clients. From her perspective, it was like these scary men just started showing up at her door one day, and out of nowhere. She was terrified of them, and she was also terrified of her on and off again boyfriend, but she never knew why all of these people wanted to hurt her. Of everybody in this story, Holly was the most innocent, and that wasn't enough to save her life. It's honestly just so gut-wrenching when you think of it, to think that somebody could be plotting to kill you over something that you didn't even do. It's really sad and it's really tragic, and who knows what her life could have gone on to be and who she could have met if she got away from Bill, and really what her life could have become. It's a very tragic case, but I appreciate you hearing her story so that her voice continues on, and so that all of these men, even though Bill is technically a victim, yes, he also did some really bad stuff to her, so like all of these men can be called out for who they are and what they did, right? I feel like that's so important. I told you guys it was a roller coaster of a case, so let me know what you think about it in the comments. Do you think that Bill was maybe managing Holly's finances and that's why he went to blackmail them? Do you think he just hacked into her phone and she didn't know that he even knew about it? Like, what do you think the truth really is here? In any event, it's just a horrific tragedy that never had to happen. It's like, I always say, don't murder people, just get a divorce or just stack up to your shit. Like, Eric, you were cheating. Own up to it. Who cares? Your reputation's gonna be tarnished from a car dealership. Like, give me a break. Instead, you're gonna hire for a double murder? Make it make sense, right? So let me know what you guys think about this case in the comments. And other than that, I'm gonna go ice my jaw. Thank you so much for tuning in with me today. And until the next one, stay safe. Bye. Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of 10 to Life with me, Annie Elise. I hope you guys are having a good day so far, whatever it is you're doing, whether you're watching.
I had no idea my old ad blocker was installing malware on my computer. That's why I got Pi. This is Pi. It's a free...
In 2005, Michelle and Stephen Andrews were both 28 years old. The two of them had both grown up in Minnesota, but in different towns of the state. Michelle was raised in Blaine, and Stephen came from Edina. Now, Blaine and Edina are only about 26 minutes away from one another, so it's definitely not far at all. However, it was far enough that their paths never really crossed while they were growing up. Now, that might be because the two of them seemed like they were complete opposites, so there wouldn't really be an opportunity for them to cross paths in extracurricular activities or through mutual friends or anything like that. And just kind of like put a little like spin on it movie-wise as a reference, if they met in high school, it definitely would have been like a Grease type situation. You know, Sandy and Danny, opposites attract, but it was the other way around. See, Michelle was the bleach blonde popular girl and had an attitude, kind of was always like the queen bee of things. She even gave her parents like absolute hell throughout her high school years. Apparently she fought with her parents a lot, so much so that her parents even considered sending her away for a short period of time, and it was just a very tumultuous time. They didn't realize it then, but later Michelle had told her parents that she was a victim of abuse. Her friend's older brother had apparently been hurting her for years, which is why she was acting out and why she was so difficult to deal with during that time. She was going through a trauma that was in no way being treated or dealt with, but she was lashing out, and her parents were having a really hard time kind of like getting a grasp on her, getting her to like get on the right path, but there was a root cause of it, they just never knew why. Now Steven, on the other hand, he was kind of like laid back, and he was like this dorky guy, for lack of a better word. He spent his time either in Boy Scouts or church youth groups, kind of more reserved, kept to himself, and I'm not saying that those things made him a dork, but like he was definitely more of a recluse in comparison to Michelle. Anyways, they both graduated from high school in 1995, which is the first of a bunch of coincidences. Or maybe it wasn't a coincidence, maybe it was fate. The point is, even though they seemed like complete opposites, a lot of little things kept bringing Michelle and Steven together. For example, after graduating high school, both of them went to college at the University of North Dakota. Now, if you've ever gone away to college, you know that the first day of college is definitely like electric. It's exciting, it's nerve-wracking, there are so many different emotions just running through your mind. Most people are thinking about meeting new people who could maybe even become their friends, or maybe even potential dating partners in the future, if that's what they're looking for. You're just kind of like on a buzz, on a high. Nobody really ever expects, though, to find the one on the very first day. You just start meeting different people, and maybe it would turn into something, who knows? But somehow that is what happened with Michelle and Steven. Because as soon as they met, it was magnetic. They just really clicked. They were so different, but somehow they also just had a lot in common. Starting with the fact that they were both from Minnesota, and they both grew up super close to each other's hometowns. So the two of them agreed to go on a first date together, and they just got along perfectly from there. They were really all in after that. And even though their relationship started fast and kind of like this whirlwind fantasy romance, like swept up in all the happiness and the love and this and that, it really didn't stay that way for long. After getting together during that freshman year of college, there ended up being some bumps in the road. One of those bumps actually resulted in them breaking up too. Now, I don't know the exact reason for the breakup or what Steven's feelings were during this time, but Michelle's mother, Linda, said that this breakup absolutely wrecked Michelle. It wasn't something that she was going to just get over by going out with friends, drinking, hooking up with other people, and moving on. No, completely the opposite. I mean, Michelle was dead set on getting back together. No matter what she had to do to get Steven back, she was going to do it. She had her like laser focus in. She wanted this relationship. She couldn't see herself with anybody else, and she didn't want to, for that matter. She was all in with Steven. Her mom, Linda, even said that Michelle started this super insane diet, basically starving herself because she felt like Steven had broken up with her due to her appearance. And she thought that by losing all of this weight and like going on this insane diet, that when he saw her and saw this huge change, he would just instantly want her back. Now, I know it sounds both sad and really silly to think about, but I think it's fair to say that sometimes those breakups, especially when you're young and you haven't dealt with ending a serious relationship before, it can feel like it is the end of the world. And you can go to very drastic measures trying to like, regain the affections of that person. I have never personally struggled with weight in the sense of like wanting to lose a bunch of weight to get somebody back or like changing my appearance in that way, but I definitely have changed my appearance for a guy. I remember back in my early 20s dating a guy who was like, he's such a loser now that I think about it, but he was in a band, he had tattoos, he like listened to metal music, all of this stuff, and like me, I like top 40 all day, every day, but anyways, we dated, not in a serious way, but I wanted him to like me in a serious way, so I like pretended to start liking metal music. I started listening to like Slayer and like crazy things. I like had jet black hair, I got my septum pierced, all this stuff, and like then I remember looking back and I'm all, what the hell? What were you thinking, you desperado loser? But like the whole reason I bring that up is because when you're young, it can feel like the end of the world, and you can feel like, oh, if I alter myself, alter my appearance, maybe they'll like me again, maybe they'll come back, and that's what Michelle was doing. Now, she was doing it with her weight, which is clearly very dangerous. Not that even appearance or anything else isn't dangerous. It definitely, mentally, it's not the best decision. But something so severe as weight loss like that and going on a strict diet where you're essentially starving yourself, please, please, please don't ever change yourself for somebody else. Ever. Especially in such a dangerous situation. Now, I don't know how long exactly the two of them were split up, but from my understanding, it was at least a few years before they ultimately got back together. But once they were together again, things then picked up fast, kind of like they did when they first got together. Both Michelle and Steven graduated from college in the year 2000, and that's also the year that they got married. Now this next part is interesting. Even though Michelle was close with her mom Linda had quite a few things to say when it came to Michelle and Steven's relationship. She told the Naples Daily News that just before Michelle and Steven got married, she shared some pretty serious concerns about their relationship and taking it to the next level with marriage. Now, since she was Michelle's mom, you'd imagine that those concerns would be for Michelle, right? Who she married, it's my daughter, I want her to have the best of the best, all of these things. Like maybe she was worried that Steven wasn't right for her, and she wanted to make sure that Michelle was going to be happy being married to him. That's what you'd expect from a mother, right? Well, actually, all of the concerns were for Stephen, not for Michelle. She said that Stephen was, quote, an angel, and she worried that by marrying Michelle, he was receiving what she called a broken doll. That was her word for how she described her daughter, a broken doll. She even said, who would think that she would have such a nice guy? I mean, come on. Now, I mentioned earlier that Michelle had raised hell for her parents, but I mean, in the grand scheme of things, she seemed to have just been a troubled teen who was going through a lot and didn't really know how to express her emotions in a healthy way. So now she was an adult and she was trying to make better choices in her life. But from the sound of it, her mom Linda just couldn't quite wrap her head around that. But Michelle wasn't going to let her mom stop her from walking down the aisle. She was going to do it. She was in love and she wanted her happy ending. So the two of them got married, and after the wedding, in July of 2000, the couple settled back in Edina, Minnesota, Stephen's hometown. And then just 3 years later, in 2003, they welcomed their first child together, a son named Lucas. During this time, Michelle was working as a nutritionist, while Stephen was getting his master's degree in landscape architecture. So it might seem like the two of them were living the dream, right? After being apart for so many years, then getting back together, getting married, leveling up in their education, their careers, having a baby. I mean, all the things that somebody would want for a fairy tale ending, right? But the reality was that that was very far from the truth. Apparently, Michelle had not only been working and taking care of the home and their newborn son Lucas, but she also had been having an affair, which I couldn't really find much information about the affair exactly, other than that it happened and that it was one of the many reasons that their marriage was rocky. I don't even know who that other person was, or if it was a coworker or a friend or what, but it happened. And apparently Stephen somehow found out, and like most people who get caught cheating, Michelle told him she was sorry, she would end things. I didn't mean for it to get out of hand, I love you, there's nobody else for me, I mean the whole thing. And I guess this was good enough for Stephen, because instead of breaking up, divorcing, all of the things, they worked on their marriage, and things did start to look up again. Stephen graduated with his master's degree in 2004, and then not long after that, he got the job offer of a lifetime. He got an offer working at a landscaping architecture firm in Gateway, Florida. Now this was a dream come true for so many different reasons. The first being that, let's face it was kind of like a fresh start for them. They wouldn't have to worry about running into Michelle's fling in town or past neighbors, friends knowing what had happened, nothing like that. It was a real, true, fresh start. Not to mention that getting a job offer like that so soon after graduating was like winning the lottery. I think that most people just expect to spend a year or two in some, entry-level job or even interning in some capacity, in some field of not what you truly want to do, just so that you can get some experience before moving on to like your real career, something that you feel passionate about. But Stephen didn't have to do any of that. He just jumped into this new glamorous job. Now the last reason that this was like a dream come true was because coming from Minnesota, they were finally going to be close to the ocean. It was really important to both Michelle and Stephen that Lucas and any other children that they eventually had could spend a lot of time outdoors. Be active, not just sit in front of a TV, the computer all day, or a tablet, things like that. If they could head out to the beach whenever they wanted, I mean, that was the dream. It was so amazing that it was almost too good to be true.
There's nothing more powerful than you making your thing happen. Really going for it. Doing business on your terms.
So after not a whole lot of thought, Stephen accepted that job, and the whole family moved in 2004 to Gateway, Florida. Now, Gateway, Florida is part of the larger Cape Coral-Fort Myers area right there on the Gulf Coast. And right away, they loved being there. The community was amazing. They owned a beautiful and spacious 2,000 square foot home. There's 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and most importantly, Stephen really loved his new job. A lot. It was once again the dream scenario. Now you would think that Stephen loving his job so much, it would be a great positive thing for this family, right? And for a few months, it truly was. Ultimately, though, it was Stephen's job that caused his marriage to once again hit the rocks. Now, it wasn't because of the job itself. Stephen had worked his tail off earning his master's degree, and the job itself was exactly what he had been looking for. But like we know, sometimes relationships are created and built in the workplace. And Stephen started working for the company in December of 2004. And by that July in 2005, just 7 months later, the firm had hired a new secretary named Kelly Ballou.
Oh boy.
Now, as soon as Stephen met Kelly, something was just different. It wasn't like they were introduced and said hi to one another and then went about on their workday. No. Their personalities clicked. And talking to each other just felt easy. They felt like they connected. They understood one another. Their personalities were the exact same. So not only did it feel easy, but they always felt like they just wanted to know more about each other. No conversation was ever long enough. No matter the information that was shared, no matter how long the conversation actually had, it was just never enough. Now, meanwhile, Michelle had expected some long hours that would turn into long nights for Stephen. But what she hadn't been expecting was for Stephen to get so close with Kelly. And she didn't like how easily the two of them had connected. At first, it started off as jealousy on Michelle's part. It didn't make her feel great knowing that Stephen was constantly talking about Kelly, Kelly this, Kelly that, always bringing her name up in conversation. And then when she saw what Kelly looked like, it definitely didn't help anything. Because if Kelly had been, this sweet, elderly, 70-year-old woman that Stephen saw as like the second mother figure, okay, great, no big deal. But unfortunately for Michelle, Kelly was the complete opposite. She was young, blonde, and just beautiful. Plus, the both of them had a lot to talk about and a lot to bond over. They both had kids, they were both in relationships that were rocky at times, and more times than not, if I'm just gonna be honest. I mean, Stephen obviously was married to Michelle, but things weren't that great, and they were still recovering from the affair that Michelle had had back in their place in Minnesota. Now, Kelly, on the other hand, also had a child and was in a relationship, but this man is somebody who she had been with for almost 6 years at this point. And Kelly confided in Stephen about just how unhappy she was in her relationship, how things just didn't feel as good as they once had in the past. So eventually, talking nonstop at work turned into exchanging phone numbers, exchanging emails, and then they started talking off the clock. And they started talking regularly. Now, even though they were communicating basically 24/7 and sneaking around so that their partners wouldn't notice, things never turned into a full-blown physical affair. I mean, there was flirting, there was secrecy, so that definitely is enough to set off an alarm bell. I mean, for me especially, I think any kind of cheating, emotional, physical at all, is the same in my perspective. That's just me. But nothing physical had happened yet. Now, maybe the affair would have gone in that direction eventually, but it didn't make it that far. Not even a quick little kiss, a peck, nothing. And certainly nothing more intimate than that. Still though, as the months went on, Michelle just knew and felt like something was up. And not to be mean, but maybe she saw the same patterns from when she was having her own affair not too long ago and recognized that. I don't know. I also think there's something to be said about a woman's intuition when you start getting that gut feeling in the pit of your stomach that something's right, or you need to check the phone or something like that. More times than not, you will find something, because I just think there is something to say about a woman's intuition. You know, girl power. We always have the good gut feelings, right? And sometimes it sucks, but it happens. So anyways, the whole point of that is that she knew about Kelly, and she knew that Stephen and Kelly were at least, close friends. She just didn't know exactly how close they truly had gotten. So that's where things stood on December 10th, 2005. And there was an office Christmas party that was being held at Stephen's work. Now, like most work Christmas parties, the office was doing, a Secret Santa gift exchange. And somehow, you guessed it, Kelly ended up getting Stephen's name. Now, Stephen had recently gotten a new car, and Kelly decided on a gift that would be perfect for him without going over, the Secret Santa spending limit that was put in place by the office. She got him a keychain that perfectly matched his new car. And I know you might hear the word keychain and think it's like, okay, it's some cheap, junky little knick-knack piece of plastic, but everybody could tell that this was a very personal gift. There was a lot of thought behind this. There was, a personal little touch. And on top of that, this was at an office party where everybody brought their partners, their spouses, their girlfriends, their boyfriends. So Michelle was literally sitting right next to Stephen while he was thanking Kelly, who was sitting right next to her boyfriend. I mean, the whole thing just sounds incredibly messy, awkward, uncomfortable, and I'm sure there was an undeniable level of chemistry between the two of them that was hard to ignore, but you gotta know when to get it in check, right? So even though Michelle had been having her suspicions for months, by this time, this is when she really knew for sure that something was up. And needless to say, she was pissed. That little keychain confirmed to her what she had already suspected. Stephen and Kelly were having an affair. And to make matters worse, not too long after that Christmas party, Michelle caught Kelly calling Stephen. And like the petty queen that she was, she answered the phone and she asked Kelly why she was calling her husband. Now, I don't know what either person said during this call, but Kelly has described Michelle as being, quote, quite nasty. And I think we can all just kind of take a guess on why she was being so nasty and what sort of things she might have said. I know if it maybe like, hello, why are you calling my husband? What do you need? You have a question about work? What's going on? And then I would go and ream his ass, but that's just me. Sorry, tell him going off, I'm making this personal. So anyways, of course, Stephen continued to deny that he was having an affair. But Michelle wasn't dumb. I mean, not at all. And remember, a woman's intuition is strong. She knew what was happening and that it was happening right under her nose. And I mean, technically, she did witness a little bit of what was going on at the work party, and now she knew Kelly was contacting him outside of work. She just had no idea how much they had been talking over the months, but she was putting it all together. For Stephen's part, it's not clear to me, though, if he thought that he was being truthful when he said that there was no affair. Maybe since nothing physical had happened at that point, he really did believe he was in the clear and that he was innocent. Guys are dumb in that way. And he wouldn't be the first person to actually convince himself that emotional affairs, don't count the same way that physical affairs do. Not to mention, Michelle had cheated on him once. So maybe he figured, I'm still a good husband because I'm not having sex. I haven't gotten physical. I haven't even kissed her. I haven't gone quite as far with this person on the side that you went with your person on the side. Maybe that's how he was justifying it. I don't know. All to say, Michelle was pissed, and she was reeling at this point. And she was also kind of lost. Stephen was denying the whole thing, but it was just so obvious that there had been something happening between him and Kelly. She wasn't sure what to do. So she confided in her mom, Linda, filling her in on how Stephen was always talking about Kelly, this suspicious Christmas gift, how Kelly was calling him now. And after that, Linda had a few words with Stephen for herself. She was in town for the holidays, and when the two of them were alone together in the car just a few days before Christmas, she straight up told him that he needed to choose one of these two women, and he needed to end all of this chaos once and for all. She told him she didn't understand why he was doing this to her daughter, which I gotta say, that's a pretty big deal considering how highly she spoke about him before the wedding, right? I'm convinced that maybe she was just more shocked about the whole thing than Michelle was. On top of that, Linda was talking to Michelle separately about making sure that she had all of her ducks in a row just in case everything came crumbling down, in case she needed a quick exit strategy. And it turns out that Linda was pretty right to worry about an impending divorce. Because even though Stephen was still insisting that no affair had happened and that he hadn't done anything wrong, the emails between him and Kelly showed that they were getting serious. They both expressed how miserable they were and how they just wanted to be together. Stephen even told Kelly that he noticed how hard Michelle was working to make things work in their marriage and repair their marriage, but that he just felt like things were too far gone. He just wasn't interested in trying to fix anything anymore. None of it was working. He now had tunnel vision. He only wanted to be with Kelly. Only Kelly. So the two of them went back and forth, planning their futures together, talking about the divorce, which Michelle, of course, didn't even officially know about yet. I mean, she had to suspect that things were in danger of falling apart, but Stephen hadn't actually told her yet. He hadn't said like, hey, it's officially not working. Hey, I'm interested in somebody else. He was still just denying the affair, trying to kind of fly under the radar and go status quo, all while Michelle was like reeling and spinning out of control trying to figure out what's going on. And then, just a few days before Christmas, another bombshell dropped. Michelle told Stephen and her parents that early in her and Stephen's marriage, she had learned that she was pregnant, and instead of telling anybody, she decided to just end the pregnancy. And she did it because she knew that the baby was not Stephen's. Apparently, the baby had been conceived during an affair. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not sure if it's the affair that I talked about earlier that Michelle was having back in Minnesota, or if maybe this was a completely different one. But either way, it's apparently an affair that Stephen knew about, and it weighed heavily on him, although he never apparently knew about the pregnancy. I do know that the situation was very messy and very difficult, because Michelle said that when she got pregnant, it was not through consensual sex. It was from an assault. And obviously, you should generally believe women and believe the victim. It's rare for people to lie about these kinds of things. But apparently, none of Michelle or Stephen's family members really were believing her when she finally told everybody. They thought that there was something else at play, that they just weren't really buying her story. She was fighting to get Stephen to stay and to work on their marriage at the time, so then when she confessed that she had gotten pregnant and that it was from an assault, her own mother even told her that, you better be telling the truth here. Kind of like she was doubting her. She also said that Stephen would want proof, essentially telling her that she better not be making all of this up as some last-ditch effort to keep her family together. Again, if she said that she was assaulted, then to me, she was assaulted. You always believe the outcry. Not to mention, how are you supposed to prove something like that? How do you prove that you were assaulted if it was so many years ago? I don't even know what Michelle's mom wanted, but the whole situation kind of just shows how truly chaotic everything was getting to be by this point in time. It was just constant drama, finger-pointing, sadness, you name it. So Christmas Day came along, and nothing was resolved or settled. And by this time, Michelle and Stephen's son was 2 years old. And even though their whole life was crumbling around them, they put a smile on their faces and tried to make Christmas the absolute best possible holiday they could for little Lucas. He was at that age where everything looked so magical, so fun, and Christmas morning you see all the presents and you see the presents that are yours, and he was kind of old enough to start to really understand how exciting it was to open the gifts, to know that these toys were his and he could play with them right away, all the magic that comes with Christmas. One of his gifts was also even a tiny little guitar. Stephen had been a huge fan of music and playing different instruments. It was something that he always wanted to bond over his children with, so this was really like the perfect, most sentimental gift he could possibly get him. And who knows, maybe teaching Lucas at such a young age, at 2 years old, would turn him into a little prodigy of sorts. Who knows? However, the magic of Christmas didn't last long. Now remember, even though Stephen and Kelly were having this emotional affair in every sense of the word, they had never taken it to the next level. Not until December 26th, when all of that planning for the future and all that built-up tension finally got the best of them. Because that day, the day after Christmas, they finally met up in person at Stephen's office. And that's where they ended up having sex for the very first time. Stephen had originally called Kelly from the beach where he was out with his parents, and he had told her that he missed her, he wanted to see her, and, of course, she was more than happy to go see him too. They were happy, or at least happy with each other despite the chaos in their personal lives, I don't know. That same day before meeting up with Stephen, Kelly had ended her 6-year relationship. She waited until after Christmas, apparently, just out of respect, but then as soon as Christmas was over, she was done, which is something that we will get into more in a little bit. And as for Stephen, he wasn't too far behind her. He was going to ask Michelle for a divorce, and apparently soon. The problem was he never got around to asking, because the very next day, on December 27th, first responders were dispatched to a home at 2221 Eagle Point Circle in Fort Myers, Florida. That was after that strange 911 call came in. There was nobody on the other end of the line, and the only thing that could be heard was that toddler crying in the background. Nobody spoke, nobody asked for help, nothing.
I'll show you the ropes, kid. Show you the ropes.
Boom, baby.
I'll show you the ropes.
All the time.
911, what is your emergency? Christmas from Sheriff's Office. We got an open line here with no sounds at all.
It was Stephen and Michelle's home, and they had just celebrated 1 year of owning that home earlier that December. The toddler, the one found crying uncontrollably and also covered in blood, It was baby Lucas. And as it turns out, Lucas is the one who called 911, which is why there was no response when the operators were asking the questions. It didn't take long for the first responders to realize that Lucas was completely fine, which was amazing news, but begs the question, if this wasn't his blood, whose was it? The officers continued walking through the home, clearing each room, trying to fit the puzzle pieces together in any way that they possibly could. They just wanted to make sense of this scene that they had just walked into. As they were walking through, they saw in the living room that the Christmas tree was still lit up. Presents were all over the floor, waiting to be opened, some being put together, some being played with. But the most eerie thing of all was how quiet it was. If you took the crying toddler out of the equation, there was no noise at all. No adults talking, no adults fighting, no arguing, nothing. Just stillness. It honestly didn't sound like any adults were even in that house at all. Then finally, they reached the master bedroom. And when they entered, Stephen was lying face down on the bed, dead. And he appeared to have a very clear and apparent gunshot wound to his head. Michelle was at the bottom of the bed, also very clearly beyond saving. She was completely naked and her body was in a position that was described as being, and this is a direct quote, grotesque. Now obviously that could mean a lot of very different things, but I haven't seen anything that goes into more detail other than that one word which the responders used when they arrived on the scene and were describing the scene. And as a reminder, they were both only 28 years old. Stephen had died from the gunshot wound to his head, and Michelle had been strangled to death. On top of that, she had been severely, severely beaten. The police were able to find DNA underneath her fingernails, so now it was only a matter of time of using that DNA and trying to match it to somebody who could be responsible for such a vicious, barbaric attack, all while a toddler is sleeping in the other room. But unfortunately, there wasn't really any other evidence at the scene, not even a murder weapon. So without anything physical to look at, the first place that the detectives decided to turn to was the neighbors. This was a very quiet, nice neighborhood after all. Not to mention it was right after Christmas. People were still enjoying their time off. Things were always pretty quiet, so surely if something had been out of the ordinary, it would have been noticed right away. So the investigators went door to door, and they were asking the neighbors, have you seen anything? Have you heard anything? Anything out of the ordinary? And luckily, some of them had. It wasn't anything actually super crazy, but some of the neighbors said that they had noticed what sounded like a very loud motorcycle. Now, if you're someone who has lived in big cities your whole life, telling detectives that you heard a motorcycle at night might not sound very important. But if you're more used to living in, quiet living, the suburbs, you know exactly what the neighbors are talking about. It's that loud revving. It's something that stands out. After a certain point, things tend to get silent in the neighborhood. Nobody's coming, nobody's going. There's no constant rush of traffic going through. Not to mention the neighbors knew who lived by and what kind of cars they drove, all of that, who was coming and going. So, unless Santa came and delivered a brand new Harley to somebody's house for Christmas, it was something that was out of the norm. And one of the neighbors even actually got up to see where the noise was coming from. That's how out of the norm it was. Which, thank God for nosy neighbors, right? Because even though they weren't able to tell where that biker had come from, they were able to get a pretty vague description of who was riding this motorcycle. The neighbor claimed that it was a man who was wearing a camouflage hoodie. That's it. And it might not sound like a whole lot, but this information did get the ball rolling. The police started canvassing any local businesses that had security cameras and businesses that were located near the family's home. They wanted to know if maybe any of them could have possibly seen this mystery motorcycle guy. And sure enough, cameras at a local 7-Eleven gas station caught the motorcycle on camera. This motorcycle was coming from the direction of the family's home as well. So now it's like you're getting a timeline, you're getting more footage, you can start really building out the case. Now this footage didn't completely clear things up entirely because it wasn't like they got this guy's full face and immediately were able to identify him, but they did have something to now show the media, urging anybody who had any information to come forward, anything that could be related to the case, a tip, a lead, something. And pretty soon after that picture hit the local news, a tip did come in. It was from a guy who worked as a local mechanic, and he told the investigators that his coworker had come into work on December 28th, and he was wearing a camo hoodie, which, okay, no big deal, lots of people wear camo hoodies, doesn't make them a criminal, but what stood out to him as odd, though, was that as soon as the guy got to work, he took off his hoodie, and he began deep cleaning it. Not only just cleaning it and like putting some water on it either, he was using a bunch of different products that were all for cleaning cars. And this whole process wasn't just like a 5-minute, let me get this stain out kind of thing. The man calling in claimed that his coworker spent over an hour cleaning this hoodie, which, I gotta say, that's pretty odd. I mean, if he had a stain on it, he probably would have left it at home. He would have worried about it later on. I mean, come laundry day, you figure it out then, or you take it to the dry cleaner. You don't come into work and spend an hour with different various cleaning products trying to get a stain out, right? So the tipster also told the police that his coworker's name was Fred Cooper. So the investigators dove right into finding more information about this Fred guy. Following that lead, they found Fred, and they asked him to come in for an interview. But immediately, the police got a very nervous vibe from Fred. He told the investigators that on the day of the murders, the 27th, he was home with his mother all evening. He even agreed to do a DNA test. Now this was late December, and even though in 2005 we all thought that technology was super advanced, it definitely wasn't compared to today. I mean, it took a while for the DNA swab to even come back, and in the meantime, the detectives had to continue their investigation. But but they were nowhere closer to figuring out what had actually happened to Michelle and Stephen. But then in January of 2006, a month later, Fred's DNA results came back, and his DNA matched perfectly with the DNA that was found underneath Michelle's fingernails. So on January 12th, 2006, Fred was arrested for the murders of Michelle and Stephen. Now I know what you're probably thinking. Okay, who is this guy, Fred Claus? What's going on here, right? I've just been calling him Fred and talking about him like he's not even important to this case until now. Well, it turns out that he has been. Kind of, at least. Because this entire case, Fred was always lurking in the background. He was the topic of all of those discussions in Kelly and Stephen's long emails. He was present at the office Christmas party. He was there the whole time. Fred was Kelly's longtime boyfriend who she had broken up with one day before the murders. And when the investigators learned who Fred really was and how he was significant in Michelle and Stephen's lives, they then, of course, knew that they needed to bring Kelly in for questioning. They, without a doubt, needed to figure out whether or not Kelly knew anything about this murder, this double murder, I should say. For all they knew, Kelly and Fred could have teamed up to get rid of this couple and get back to their normal lives and just eliminate the problem so we can get back to being happy the 6 years we've had and, like, not throw all of that away. I mean, it's definitely not something we haven't seen before in a case like this, right? And thankfully, Kelly was more than cooperative. In fact, she reached out to the investigators before they could even contact her. As soon as she had learned about the murders, she called in wanting to provide any information that could be helpful, and it seemed like she really, genuinely had cared for Stephen. Everything that Kelly told them checked out, and she was able to paint a much clearer picture as to what really happened before the murders. Of course, she filled them in on all of the juicy details about her and Stephen's affair as well, also about Michelle's suspicions, I mean everything. But she was also really able to shed light on Fred's mindset leading up to the murders. Like I briefly mentioned earlier, Kelly had ended things with Fred the day after Christmas. Her exact reason for why she broke things off on the 26th was, and I quote, "It was the holidays, and I didn't want to kick him out on the street during the holidays." So she woke up on the 26th, and she knew that that was the day that she was finally going to end things. She and Fred ate lunch together, they went shopping for their daughter, and then she finally pulled the plug on their relationship. And at first, apparently things were cordial. It was like Fred wasn't surprised at all. Maybe he even expected it a little bit. So they agreed that he would move out on January 1st, and they even talked about what would happen in the future if she got into another relationship. She told him that she wanted to be respectful of her future partner, of his future partners, and they both agreed. However, Fred's cool, calm, and collected facade, it did not last for very long. As we know, she also met up with Stephen that very day, and then their relationship became physical for the very first time, and the only time. And then when she got home, apparently Fred was on her computer. She basically told him that she was going to bed, so get out of her room since they now weren't sleeping in the same room anymore, and he did. Nothing seemed too odd, I mean, at first anyway. Kelly fell asleep around 10, but then she was woken up not too long after that by her daughter and also her niece who was spending the night. It was the sounds of a sleepover, maybe getting a little bit too loud. So when Kelly went to go check on them, to quiet them down, to get them back to sleep, the kids told her that Fred was gone. She obviously thought that it was kind of strange, and she asked them if he had said where he was going, but apparently he hadn't. He just booked it, just left. So Kelly called him, wondering what he was doing out so late at night, but his phone went to voicemail. Then, about 15 minutes later, he called her back. And once they were finally able to talk, she asked him why he just left so suddenly, and also, where are you? Where are you at? Where'd you go? And he apparently just blew her off. Said that he just needed to go for a drive. He just needed to clear his mind with everything, kind of decompress from the whole situation. So she was probably thinking, okay, whatever, enough with the drama, I'm going back to bed. So that's exactly what she did. She went back to sleep. But not too long after that, she woke up again. And this time it wasn't because of, little chatterboxes or giggles from a sleepover. Not at all. Instead, she had that very strange, intense feeling that we all get sometimes when something is up and when we're being watched. You know how, like, if you're sleeping, your eyes are closed, you can, like, feel if you're being watched, and you open your eyes and you're like, oh, what the hell, what's going on? Why are you watching me? That kind of thing. It literally happens to me with my son every single morning because he sleeps with me. I'll, like, open my eyes and he's right there, or my daughter on the other side of me because they sandwich me, and then I open my eyes and she literally is looking at me and she just goes, and just smiles in my face, and I can't help but laugh. But anyways, you know that feeling. So as soon as she opened her eyes, she saw Fred, and he was standing over her. He was sobbing uncontrollably, and he was just babbling about how he couldn't live without her, he loved her, I can't be without you. It took some time, but Kelly managed to calm him down, and then she told him, like, go to your own room, like, you're bugging me, go away, just calm down. But 10 minutes later, before she was even able to fall back asleep, Fred barged back into her room, and he was acting the same way. But this time, he ran to the closet where he kept his gun and his ammo. He grabbed both of them, and he stormed out of the door. So understandably, she called him. She was worried about what he was doing, and he told her that he was in his truck. He was still crying, though, talking about how he couldn't live without her, all of these things. Now, I don't really know where things went from there or how that night ended. My first thought is that it sounded like Fred was maybe going to harm himself. I don't know if maybe Kelly was able to calm him down, or if this was something that she had seen before and wasn't really concerned about it. Not that somebody attempting to take their own life isn't concerning, but I feel like maybe we've all unfortunately had a time or two where an ex or somebody after a breakup is trying to manipulate the other person almost, trying to get them back by, like, threatening to hurt themselves, even if it's not in a serious way. unless I just have a history of dating unhinged people. It's only happened once, and they weren't serious, thank goodness. But you know what people do, trying to manipulate it so that, like, you won't leave them? But remember that so far as Kelly knew, Fred still didn't know about Steven at all. Though I'm starting to wonder if maybe she was having some suspicions that he had figured it all out. I mean, he was on her computer after all, and they had exchanged a lot of emails. And there was another sign that Fred might have suspected things. It didn't ring any alarm bells at the time, but then after the murders, when Kelly was looking back in hindsight, she realized that it was a pretty big deal. After she had broken up with Fred, he told her to listen to a song that she had just told Steven to listen to the week prior.
Welcome to
she
the
gave
party.
Steven that recommendation through email. So Fred might have seen that exchange when he was on her computer. The following morning on the 27th, things between Kelly and Fred seemed back to normal, or as normal as things could be for a couple who was broken up but still living together in the same home. He went his own way, he headed off to work, and Kelly did the same thing, heading out to hang out with a friend. That evening, though, things started to get weird. At around 3:30 p.m., Kelly stopped by her house after hanging out with a friend for a few hours, and she was shocked to see that Fred was already at home waiting for her. And usually he didn't get home until 6:30 or 7, so he was home hours earlier than usual. And he said that since he had taken one for the team and worked on Christmas Eve, they let him go home early for the day, which it sounded like a reasonable explanation. And to be honest, she didn't really care all that much. She just needed to grab something, and then she was going to head back out and go with her friend. It was just a quick, pit stop by her house, and that's exactly what she did. She went inside, got whatever it was that she needed, and then she left. But then literally just 10 minutes later, Fred called her in a complete panic. He said she needed to come home right away because something really bad had happened. Obviously, as a mother, her first thought was that something had happened to her daughter, and she practically, flew home. Once she got back, though, she was confused, because her daughter was fine. Everything at the house seemed fine. So Fred told her that right before he had called her, he heard some very shocking news. Their good friends and Kelly's co-worker, Steven and Michelle Andrews, they had been found murdered in their home. So Kelly is receiving this information, and her entire world just shifted, and everything felt like it was upside down. She was sick to her stomach, and she was also confused. Her first thought was to call she and Steven's boss. All Fred knew was the fact that they had been murdered, no other details. So surely, if Fred, who barely knew the two of them, had heard the news by now, then of course their boss must have also been notified, right? They had probably heard the news even earlier, and they may have had more time to talk to different people and figure out all of the details. But the weird thing was, when Kelly called her boss, they hadn't heard the news yet. They had no idea that Steven was dead, let alone found brutally murdered inside his own home. So I think this moment was maybe when the gears in Kelly's head started shifting. Fred had been weird the night before. He had gone in and out of the house, once with a gun too. He had been going in where Kelly was peacefully sleeping, watching over her, waking her up, berating her, sobbing uncontrollably. All while Kelly was sleeping peacefully, knowing she had just broken up with him, that maybe she was going to wake up and be one day closer to a life with Steven. So Kelly apparently straight up asked Fred where he had been the night before, and more importantly, if he had been in Gateway, where the couple lived. He of course denied having anything to do with the murders, and even went as far as making her feel guilty for assuming that he could have been involved in something so brutal. And I'm not sure if she even realized that he had already been questioned by the detectives and had given them that DNA swab, but I do know that when January 1st came, Fred moved out, just like how he and Kelly had agreed to. Because even though Steven was at this point dead, she still didn't want to be with Fred. Steven's unfortunate death didn't change anything. Now she just wanted to focus on herself and her daughter. And even though her future was going to be very different from the one that she had imagined initially, and much lonelier now considering that Steven was supposed to be in it and now he couldn't be, she just wanted to move forward with her life. And I can only imagine how Kelly felt when she heard for the first time that Fred had been arrested for Steven and Michelle's murders. There was probably some part of her deep down in her gut that knew all along. I mean, the warning signs were there, but she even admitted that she didn't want to believe that he was capable of that kind of evil. Fred's trial didn't begin until October of 2008, and let me just tell you, it completely shocked everyone. Up until he actually showed up in court that first day, everybody had just assumed that he was this jealous ex-boyfriend who wanted revenge on Kelly for cheating on him. The storyline is pretty common, so it's not like this case is really something that was too out there, but it was just a matter of waiting to see what the defense was going to throw out there, especially since Michelle had his DNA underneath her nails. I mean, that's a pretty big piece of evidence to try and work around and try to prove that your client is innocent. However, once the trial began, a whole other narrative was thrown in, and it was definitely not something that anybody was expecting. The story that the defense told was that, yeah, Fred had been dumped, and he was upset when he learned about the affair that Kelly had been having. However, he never wanted revenge. It was nothing like that. They claimed that the reason that he and his motorcycle were seen near the couple's home, and the reason that his DNA was found underneath Michelle's nails, was because he and Michelle had started having a thing with one another. Something that eventually turned sexual as well. Now, obviously, that's the watered-down version of events, but shockingly, Fred had testified, and he gave some pretty thorough testimony to back his story up. So, let me break that down for you. Fred said that he met both Stephen and Michelle multiple times before their deaths. Whether it was in the office, coming and going to meet Kelly, a co-workers party, or office parties, they somehow all knew each other, and all of them were cordial with one another, but they weren't the best of friends. They were getting together for group activities, office get-togethers, things like that, but they weren't getting together for like cookouts or intimate hangout sessions, just the four of them, nothing like that. But that changed as his relationship with Kelly started getting rocky right before that office Christmas party, the one where Kelly gave Stephen that keychain. Now, according to Fred, they were hitting a rough patch, but he didn't think that it was so bad that he and Kelly might actually break up. He figured that they just needed to work through their issues, the same way that they had worked through all of the problems that they ever had in their relationship in the previous 6 years. And according to Fred, around this same time, they were just having normal relationship arguments, and the arguments were about things that had also been issues in the past between the two of them. So from his perspective, the whole thing was just kind of not a big deal. And on the day of that infamous work party, things started off pretty normal, at least from Fred's perspective. Apparently, he and Kelly sat at the same table with the couple, because, I mean, why not? They all knew each other, they all got along, so it was just the natural thing to do. He said that there was never any tension, animosity, inappropriate looks, nothing. To him, the party was just like any other office Christmas party that you go to out of obligation, you know? You do your time, then you leave. Well, here's where things get really interesting. Fred claimed that a day or two after the party, he received a very unusual phone call from none other than Michelle. And in the courtroom, he wasn't able to say what Michelle told him during that call exactly because it's hearsay, but he pretty much alluded to the idea that during this call, Michelle told him about what was going on between Stephen and Kelly, and that's how he ended up learning about their affair. Apparently, this call was pretty short, kind of just like a, hey, I think your wife is cheating on you with my husband, that kind of thing. And he testified that on that same day, they agreed to meet up in person to talk about things, to get to the bottom of whatever was going on. So he testified that they met during his lunch hour at work, and they met in a parking lot of a restaurant. Apparently, they both talked about how things had been going in their own respective relationships. Michelle shared the reasons why she believed the affair was happening, and the way that Fred described it was kind of like he and Michelle were on the same team working towards the same goal, to confirm their suspicions with each other, and sort of reassure one another, like, no, you're not crazy, it's actually exactly what you think. So after this meeting, Fred claimed that they kept in contact through multiple short phone calls, basically just updating each other on their separate relationships, and if they had noticed anything funny, anything out of the ordinary. He even went as far as saying that he felt like he had an ally in Michelle. Then, after Kelly broke up with Fred, Michelle ironically called him again just to check in. And this time, after hearing that Kelly had pulled the plug on their relationship, they decided to meet up in person once again. And it's important to note that Fred claimed that their breakup was prior to Christmas, but of course, like we heard earlier, Kelly claimed that it was the day after Christmas, on the 26th. Anyway, when they met up this time around, Michelle told him to come to her and Stephen's house after Fred got off work. He claimed that he didn't know directions to their house, but Michelle provided them. And this in-person meeting at their house was essentially just like the others. They talked about their growing concerns about Stephen and Kelly's affair. Michelle was worried that things between the two of them had now become sexual, but she hadn't been able to quite confirm it yet. And they were apparently such allies in this that Fred even claimed that he got her a card from Walgreens, which is like a CVS or a Duane Reade, that said, hang in there. Now, going by his testimony, this meeting was around 20 minutes long, and it ended with the two of them agreeing to stay in contact with any new updates or information. He also said that he never once went to Kelly and confronted her about the affair, not before their breakup and not after. So instead, Fred claimed that before Christmas, he and Michelle kept talking, and they agreed to meet up again on the 26th, after the holidays were over. And that night, when he met up with Michelle, she was extremely emotional and extremely upset. And somehow from there, they ended up being physically intimate. He described the situation as being, quote, one of them things that just happens. Now, from the sounds of things, going by Fred's testimony, this wasn't planned. They didn't meet up with the intention of hooking up, but instead they were just unhappy in their relationships. They were very emotional. They were bonding together over their heartache, I guess you could say, and then things just got out of hand. And even though it was not part of the plan, Fred testified that their game plan stayed the same afterward. They agreed to stay in contact and report on Stephen and Kelly, but that they wanted to make their respective relationships work. Now, I know that that was a lot, and I can only imagine how everybody in the courtroom felt about this complete bomb that Fred just dropped. Even though it sounded kind of insane, everybody had to admit that it could be possible. Michelle had cheated on Stephen before, so it's not like she was completely above sleeping with another man, even if she was also trying to win Stephen back and win him over. It would also explain why the DNA was underneath her fingernails, right? So as much as everyone didn't want to believe that it was true, they kind of scratched their heads and sat back really wondering if there could be something to this entire story. Fred said that on December 27th, he learned about the murders from the news, which I have to say it's interesting because we know that he knew about them before Kelly and Stephen's boss had even been notified about the murders. It's also weird because he claimed that when he and Kelly talked about it, she specifically told him that she needed an alibi. He said that she asked him to go down to the sheriff's station and to give her one. So he was claiming that Kelly was being the suspicious one and kind of throwing things back on her in all of this. And the last thing that he touched on during his testimony was that hoodie that he had been cleaning, the one he was cleaning for like an hour at work. He claimed that there was a fairly simple explanation for all of that. that road grime, as he called it, from his motorcycle was on the hoodie. Regular laundry detergent wouldn't get it out. So that's why he waited until he got to work so that he could use some, more powerful, serious car cleaner on it. Now, the question in all of this was whether this jury would buy all of his testimony. I mean, you have to admit that compared to some of the wildly out there things we've heard defense teams say, this wasn't that crazy. And I'm not the only one who thought that, apparently. Because when it came time, the jury deliberated for 32 full hours. Then they finally came back and told the judge that they could not come to a conclusion. Fred's trial ended in a hung jury. So his new trial began just 4 short months later. But this time, things didn't run so smoothly for Fred's defense team. Fred ultimately just could not keep his story straight. During his first trial, he had delivered his own testimony with such confidence, such conviction. It was like it was all a fact. But during his second trial, things got messy. I guess when you are telling such detailed lies over and over again, it's hard to remember exactly what your story was because there were a lot of inconsistencies. And what do they always say? The truth never changes. It's easier to remember the truth than a lie, and that's true. Now, the main lie was that he and Michelle had been having an affair, and I want to make it abundantly clear that it was not true. We know this. We know this first because Fred straight up confessed in a letter that was written to Kelly that the whole story about the affair was a complete lie. He made it all up, trying to make himself look innocent so that he wouldn't be found guilty, and it came really, really close to working. Plus, Fred said that he and Michelle were calling and texting all of the time, but there's absolutely no record of that. None at all. And I just wanted to add this all in because I think it's important to know, because it feels like speaking ill of the dead, and I can't even imagine how Michelle's family probably felt hearing all these accusations and all of these things about Michelle in that courtroom. But the point is, Fred wasn't some clueless bystander who happened to be having an affair. The prosecutors have theorized that in the early hours of the 27th, Fred hopped on his motorcycle, went to the couple's home, all with the intention to take out his competition, kill Stephen. Now, while I'm sure there was much more to it, in Fred's eyes, Stephen was the cause for he and Kelly's breakup. There aren't any concrete theories on how he got into the home, but I mean, obviously he did. Then, in a fit of rage, he shot Stephen as he was just lying in his own bed, sleeping. And a lot of people have wondered why he killed Michelle, and while we obviously don't have the direct answer from Fred's mouth, it's suspected that when Michelle tried to get away, Fred just snapped, and that he didn't even think twice about killing her or sparing her life, for that matter. Even though she was innocent when it came to this affair, she was now a witness to the crime, so she had to go. And my best guess is that because the whole thing really wasn't planned, Michelle's death was probably just an afterthought, a quick cover-up, a frantic movement in his murder spree. In Fred's mind, she was nothing more than collateral damage. Now, the most interesting theory of the whole thing is how exactly 911 was called. I mentioned earlier that it was just assumed that Lucas was the caller. I mean, his little babbling was heard in the background of the call, his cries. He was 2 years old, so I guess it's not entirely impossible that he would have been taught to call 911 in case of an emergency. I mean, it would be very, very impressive, but not impossible. But some people think that Fred was the one who called, and that he handed the phone over to Lucas before then fleeing the scene. Almost like an act of remorse that he had left this toddler without 2 parents, which, could that be accurate? I mean, there are things that we just won't ever know the answers to. Unlike in Fred's first trial, the jurors definitely did not take long. They only deliberated for about 90 minutes before they finally reached a verdict. Fred was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of armed burglary. He was sentenced to 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Now, it really hurts my heart knowing that Michelle and Stephen's son never got to grow up with his parents. You don't have any memories from 2 years old and earlier, so he can't even remember them at all, what they look like. I mean, you can see pictures, sure, but he never got to grow up with his parents. I'm sure he was probably placed with family members, which is far better than any other alternatives, but obviously it's still not the same as having your mom and your dad around. His entire life, and obviously both Stephen and Michelle's, could have been so different, all if they hadn't been senselessly killed over jealousy. And this is just yet another case that shows just how far jealousy can go. I feel like we have seen it so many times, different love triangles, different affairs, and I will say, in like a joking way, just get a divorce, but even if you get the divorce, let it go. If you're being broken up with, let it go. The ripple effect that you are causing now and how many victims you have basically created out of this situation, all because you're jealous, all because you feel like you lost your girlfriend because she wanted to move on. Senseless isn't even a strong enough word. I don't know what it is. It's selfish, it's illusory, I don't even know. It's just horrible. It's horrible. That's not a good word, but that's the only one that comes to mind. But again, it's just another example of how far jealousy can take people. So always be aware. Always be aware if you are being broken up with, if you're the one doing the breaking up, whatever situation you're in, please don't have affairs because it just heightens the probability of something like that happening. Just do things right, break up, then get with the person. I mean, do things by the book because you never know how people are going to respond and react. I know that was long-winded, guys, but thank you so much for tuning into another episode. Don't forget, subscribe if you haven't done so that you don't miss any of the future episodes. YouTube's been doing this funny thing again lately where they unsubscribe people and they turn their notifications off. It's not just me, it happens with other channels, so not only double check on this channel, but any other channels you're subscribed to, just double check that you're subscribed, hit that button, turn your notification bell on so that you get notified of the new episodes. But YouTube, I feel like it's quarterly, every quarter.